Welcome to Renewal at 50 Plus. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those of you listening now and those listening later. And sorry if there was any problem for folks getting on. I'll look into that. And thank you for those who've introduced yourself. If you haven't, please go into the chat, say hello, and let us know where you're from. And today we're talking about a really relevant, terrific topic, which is all about how to create an executive presence that makes you more marketable. And we have a very special guest who I'll introduce in a minute. I just want to share one really interesting statistic on executive presence. And that is that a survey by Gartner of thousands of CIOs found that executive presence was actually the number two trait that they listed for in terms of what's needed to be a leader. And that far surpassed technology skills, which came in at number 10. Also, executive presence is very important if you want to get promoted, particularly into a leadership position. And today we have the absolute maestro of executive presence, Rob Salafia. And I'm just so thrilled to have a conversation with him. And Rob has such a fascinating background. He began his career actually as a performance artist and traveled around the world doing one-man shows. And he has since become, and I'm hoping he'll share a little bit with us of how he's done this, but he's since become an executive coach. He's a facilitator and coach at MIT's Sloan School of Management. He's an author, a speaker, an all-around great guy, and I'm excited to have him here. So welcome, Rob.
Wendy, I'm delighted to be here on your program, and it's a very relevant topic for me since I am quite a few years now past 50.
Well, yeah, you and me both. And loving it, actually.
Yeah.
Why don't you start, Rob, sharing very briefly your journey, how you got from performance artist to where you are now?
Well, you know, that's I've had one of those nonlinear careers and nonlinear lives where I started in one direction and moved in another. In college, I was a geography major. I was international development. And I found myself as a junior in college in Kathmandu, Nepal for a semester of school. And it was a pretty interesting, very cathartic time, 20 years old, 1975. At the end of 3 months, I went to northern India and took a 10-day Vipassana mindfulness meditation course. Now think about that. I was 20 years old. That's like 1975. Very different world back then. No cell phones, it was pretty interesting. The thing that I found remarkable, I'll tell you one story. I'm standing on the train platform going up to the meditation retreat, and this young man came up to me, and he was exactly my age, and he was from a Sikh family. And if you've seen individuals from India with turbans on and beards, that's this sect of religion. And he asked me what I was doing. He wanted to practice his English. And then he said, where are you going? I told him where I was doing. And I had a couple of days, to go sightsee. And he said, would you like to come and visit with my family? Which I did. And I spent 2 days with him, his sister, his mom, and his dad. And every night, 2 nights in a row, I went for a long walk with his dad, who was an amazing person. He was in the government, and he was so interesting. He had such deep knowledge and very thoughtful. And then they took me to their temple. And it was this, very circular temple. It had everyone was crowded. It was big audience in attendance. And then they had a tabla player and 2 harmonium players. This is like a drummer and these little organ players. And it was so soulful, the music. And I was looking around saying, this is amazing. And that whole idea of being open to new experiences. When I got back home, it was difficult for me to it was a little bit of a culture shock, reverse culture shock. I didn't end up becoming a geography and international development person. I ended up taking a left-hand turn, went into theater. I became a street performer. I became a juggler, tap dancer, rope and wire walker, and I did a lot with audience participation. I did street theater and stage theater as well. And the lessons that I learned in theater were remarkable. And so I'd love to share a couple with you, but any thoughts, any questions that you might have given that little part of the journey so far?
Oh, well, thank you, Rob, for sharing that. And what made you go from being the street performer to becoming an executive coach and an expert in executive presence? And just tell us briefly, and then I'd like to talk about what executive presence is.
Perfect.
And why we should care about it.
Perfect. Well, as a performer, I learned many skills. And one thing, a major lesson I learned from one of my theater directors was that it's not about the skill, it's about the experience you want to create for your audience. And so that's one of many lessons that I learned in theater. At 35, I had almost made it. I was cast in a theater show that was supposed to go to Broadway, but it never quite got off the ground. I was cast as the lead in it. And I'm 35 and I'm looking around and I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have much money in the bank. And I thought, I think I better make a shift, a transition. And so I hired a career consultant. And it was the first time I had asked myself on a lot of these questions, because right out of college, I went into theater. Questions like, values, what's important to me, how do I want to make a difference in the world, transferable skills. I got it so well that they ended up hiring me. And then 6 months later, I was in a conversation with a very good friend of mine at Boston University who ran a program for people with disabilities, emotional disabilities. And he needed a job developer. Well, guess what? I got hired as their job developer because that's what I was doing. And it was half sales. It was also, I was developing and learned clinical and counseling skills because I was trained as a rehabilitation counselor. I went over to the personnel office at BU and I introduced myself to the woman that ran the university training group. And she invited me to join that. So I started to teach corporate training classes around campus. So this was sort of like I taught what I most needed to learn. And then I also got my master's in business. So in 5 years, I put 15 years of career development. I learned all about different companies across the city of Boston, from nonprofits to banks, because I was learning how to find and develop positions within these organizations for people with disabilities. And then all of the other skill set. And I looked and I had an amazing skill set. I could be in front of any audience. I learned how to coach and work with people who were highly sensitive. And I also really got excited about corporate learning. I leveraged my background in theater. So that's one lesson I learned, is that you bring all your experience with you. And as we grow into whatever age we're at, and so we don't put our experiences to bed, we don't shelve our experiences. We bring them with us.
Yeah, I want to underscore that point because, like you, I've had a multifaceted career journey, and now, at least on my fifth, I've kind of lost track. But But what I found is that, like as you're saying, Rob, it's each different career. You bring what you did before. It's not like you say goodbye to that, but you take that with you and become something more.
Something more. That's what I really like that. So in this transition, one of my friends who I did some of the corporate training around campus with said, Rob, I'm learning to become a coach. Let me coach you. And I said, fine. He says, what do you want? And it was the first time that I could truly answer that question, because I had this great skill set. I said, I want to be recognized for what I have to offer. I'd like to be introduced to 2 or 3 consulting companies. Clear as a bell. 2 weeks later, I'm in Harvard Square and I meet an old friend of mine. He has this woman with him who was the head of HR for Societe Generale, the French investment bank. He was working for this company that used theater methodology to teach storytelling and leadership communication skills.